Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
With officers like Freddie Goff and Digby Tatham Water about, there was no lack of ribaldry and even tomfoolery. Digby's umbrella was a useful tool. This was Digby's first battle, and I remember him asking, "I would like to know if this is worse or not so bad as the other things you have been in." I think I replied, "Difficult to say. In some ways it is worse, and in some ways not. At least we have got food and water. It won't be so good when the ammunition runs out." That's Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's recollection of what it was like at the bridge at Arnhem on Tuesday, the 19th of September 1944. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, your Second World War podcast for all your Second World War podcasting needs.
And what's the next line that followed? And I assured Freddie that all was going to be just fine.
No.
Oh,
no,
dear.
the next bit. I mean, the thing is, this book is full of. It then goes on. Douglas Crawley's experienced outlook was a great boon. He was ever a man for taking the rough with the smooth. After we were both hit by the same bomb, he alleges that I said, "There you go again, always getting wounded. What a silly ass I was to come and talk to you in the middle of a battle."
You chump.
These are great people. Come on.
They are absolutely fantastic people. I mean, this is what Britain of a certain period was built on.
Yes.
People like that. I do remember it from Frost's memoir that there's a picture of him with a sort of floppy hat on and a pipe sticking out of his mouth, driving around on a tractor somewhere on his farm in Dorset or somewhere, wherever it was he retired to.
Well, he turns up. There was a BBC quite a while ago, a Cold War documentary, about, like sort of fringes of Cold War culture. And he turns up in that as one of those sort of people in one of those army jumpers with the patches on the shoulders going, "I would, of course, form a home defence force in the event of nuclear war. And experienced officers such as myself would be the people in the vanguard of the defence, of civilization."
Yeah, bring it on. Let's hope it all happens.
Exactly. I really want to fight someone. Please let me fight someone.
Dust down the hunting horn and...
So, the situation at midnight in Arnhem on Black Tuesday with Penguin in all good bookshops is basically two para at the bridge with the buildings on fire, gunfire. The Germans, supposedly don't attack at night, but at the bridge they're making an exception for that. And that's a big thing that actually characterises the fighting at the bridge, is it is relentless. It never stops. And the Germans try wave after wave, and they try sort of disconnected attacks, and gradually they figure out the best way to sort of kettle and winkle the parachutists out.
How many Germans are killed probably on the bridge?
Well, I've got some estimates for the final episode. No one really knows. The Germans don't really keep...
Hundreds? Thousands?
I think hundreds. There are lots of estimates. And Robert Kershaw, who wrote It Never Snows in September, which is the absolutely brilliant battle completely from the German perspective. And he found all sorts of stuff. He thinks that, Army Group B's estimates are wrong and everyone's estimates are wrong, and you've got to probably double most of the numbers that the Germans offer for the battle.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So 2 power hanging on, 1 and 3 power in the town, but they're out of contact with each other. 11 power have arrived. The South Staffords are in town as well. Urquhart's in his loft. But back at Divisional HQ, in the last episode we talked about how there's this command vacuum. Back at the Divisional HQ, this is where that comes to a head.
Yeah.
Because Shan Hackett is very, very annoyed that 11 para have been taken off his command and handed in nominally to 1st Parachute Brigade, even though there is no brigadier and there's no one in charge in the town at this point. And he sets off for the Hartenstein to speak to Brigadier Hicks, to speak to Pip Hicks, who's been put in charge of the division. And they have an enormous row. They go to the corner of one of the rooms and it's like one of those, "What are you doing?" and all this sort of stuff. What's interesting is, and there's lots of accounts of this, and there is one account which is, some staff officers are going, "Quick, come downstairs, the brigadiers are having a tremendous row, come and listen."
Can you believe it?
Can you believe it, right? And basically, Hackett makes an enormous fuss. And in one account he says, "So I got there and it was all too vague, so I wrote myself some orders, signed them off, and went back to my headquarters to carry on with what I was going to do anyway," basically, right? And we discussed that yesterday, that in the last episode, we discussed how what he wants to do is swing his brigade around the north of the railway line and push into the north of Arnhem, rather than feed itself into the wedge in the town and the bottleneck in the town. That's what he's supposed to be doing anyway. And he's made this decision based on what he regards as the most untidy situation. But what they don't do, and Hicks goes, fine, all right. And Hackett gets to the point where he says, because the interesting thing about this is, even though Hicks is much older than him, Hackett was actually promoted to brigadier a couple of months before Pip Hicks, and so makes claims to seniority.
So it's a bit kind of Chard and Bromhead.
Yeah, if you don't let me do what I'm going to do, I actually ought to be in command of the division anyway, thanks very much. I should be taking over. Even though, in the succession laid out by Roy Urquhart as he boarded his hawser in England on the Sunday, 2 days before, even though Hackett is last in his decided succession, Lathbury, Hicks, Hackett. Hackett says, well, I ought to be in charge, because he hasn't been told that this is the order of things. He doesn't know, and he's livid. And he's also, And
where's Mackenzie at this point?
Mackenzie's, the other corner in the room, like, watching this all unfold.
And is he saying, no, the boss definitely said it should be Hackett? But definitely be Hicks, rather.
It cuts no ice.
But Hackett's beyond all that. He can care less.
It's beyond all that. And what also happens is, this is then in a bridge too far in the 60s when the Cornelius Ryan book came out. And Hackett wrote a stern letter to the Sunday Times saying, that absolutely did not happen. It was an agreeable business and we all got on terribly well, sort of thing.
But clearly that's just rubbish.
Clearly, for journalistic headlines, he's amped up this event. And I just don't think, this is one of these things we think, what are you doing? And also...
So there is a row. There definitely is a row. There's no doubt about it.
There definitely is a row. But also the outcome is that Hackett goes off to do his own thing anyway. And you, in the last episode, you said you get the feeling that it's a sort of atomized, dispersed formation before they ever get to Arnhem.
Yeah.
With people doing their own thing. And that's what he decides to do. What they don't do, and apparently it is ended amicably, but apparently what they don't do is say there needs to be someone in charge in the town because there's no one in charge because Gerald's missing, right? And they don't go, hang on a minute, will this push swing around to the north of town? Will that work? Is that the best use of our fresh battalions? Even though 156 at this point are actually caught up in a fight anyway, so are no longer like completely fresh and completely coherent, right? So it just seems that in the row and in the sort of, in this moment where you needed a command structure and you needed someone making decisions, not only is there an argument about who ought to be in charge, they don't actually examine what they're going to do and act coolly.
Got it.
And I think that's there's schools of thought that say this battle's fated to go wrong anyway. It can't work. It shouldn't work. But here's a moment where there's fresh people have arrived, the second lift, decide what to do with them with the actual situation in mind, rather than kind of the orders you had, the aspirations you had that were drawn up, a week ago in a planning committee.
Yeah, and frankly, you're kind of 2 days late. I mean, a day late. I mean, you're new to this,
and you're going to go off and do your own thing because
you've taken umbrage.
If that's even it, it's just they're not thinking coolly and clearly. And I find that kind of like that's one of these moments where there is direct consequence of Urquhart's decision. A, to go forward, and B, to not have made clear who's in charge. Because maybe if Hackett had known that, he wouldn't have come in angry, going, what the hell's going on?
This bunch of losers.
Yeah. And that happens about 1:30, and then Hackett goes back to his headquarters. At 0300 hours, there's an absolutely desperate piece of fighting happens at the school.
Which is by the bridge at Arnhem.
So Mackay's men, and they're on the ramp, and Mackay's men, and he's got, kind of 40 RSC people and then his sappers. The building is struck by a mortar bomb or a bazooka, and the accounts differ. And everyone in the building is knocked out. Everyone's knocked out by the blast, stunned by the blast. The Germans then form up around the building, literally surrounding it. And Mackay thinks, well, because we were all knocked out, there was like no reaction from us. So the Germans assume the building's empty.
Knocked out as in rendered unconscious?
Stunned.
Yes.
Everyone's stunned. Yeah, exactly. Rendered senseless. He comes to, dusts himself down, and he gets the men, and they've abandoned the ground floor at this point, right? They've blockaded the ground floor, and the stairs up and down the stairs, down to where the wounded are being kept in the cellar, are slick with blood, and the dead are being kept under the stairs, like being stacked under the stairs, right? 60 or so Germans form up around the school, so he gets his lads, and they've all wrapped their boots in sort of fabric, they're tiptoeing around, and he gets everyone, even the walking wounded, at the windows. And then on the call, they rain grenades down and blast away with machine guns at the Bren guns and Stens and rifles and everything.
The Germans cut to pieces.
And kill probably 30 of these Germans, and the rest all run away. And they take a load of weapons, a load of machine guns and Panzerfausts and stuff, and equip themselves with that. Because, this is one of the things that the airborne guys are likely to do, is particularly take hold of German automatic weapons, because they just know they've got a firepower problem and they need to address it any which way they can, even at the risk of using German weapons with German sound signatures that basically might result in a battle accident, as it's known.
Sure.
In the town to the west, about 1.5 miles to the west, there's an O group.
And an O group, for those who don't know, is an orders group. And this is like a gathering of officers, senior NCOs, whatever. And it's where you kind of discuss what the plan is and what you're going to do.
And they gather in the basement of this building, and you've got at the O group, and there's a witness to this. So there's a guy called Major Ian Toller, who's in the Glider Pilot Regiment, who turns up. And, they're in a basement, guttering candles, everyone looking exhausted. This is the other thing, they've all been on the go since they arrived, so Colonel David Dover, he's into his third day straight without any sleep.
Yep.
Because after all, they flew first thing on the Sunday morning to get to Arnhem.
Of course.
I doubt anyone slept the night before,
Yep.
Really, he's been under a lot of pressure. So there's Colonel of 1 Para, David Doby. There's the 11 Para Colonel George Lee, who's late. Derek McCarthy from the South Staffords, who's another one of those people who went into the drink in Sicily the year before.
Right.
And they're gathered together at about 10 o'clock the night before. They've been told by Division that the bridge has fallen and they're to not try and get to Frost anymore, to give up. But then their attack is called off. And then they're told, actually, no, he's still at the bridge. You have to get to Frost at all costs. And they were like, right, what are we going to do? So the plan is, and this place in my book I've called the Bottleneck, which is where the main road that runs sort of straight to Arnhem is joined by the road that comes up from the river. And it's all uphill, this bit. And then they meet, and then they bifurcate and they split. And one carries on straight up into the town, uphill into the town, and curves away slightly, and had tram lines on it at the time. St. Elizabeth Hospital on the left, and of course opposite that, Zwarteweg 14 with Roy Urquhart in it at this precise moment. Then you've got allotments and buildings, and then there's an embankment that drops down between the two roads, down to the other road that splits down, goes down right on the river level. And there's this very, very steep embankment, very, very steep gradient. Mm-hmm. The time had shrubbery on it. If you go there now, it's fully grown trees, but had shrubbery on it. So really not very much cover. And opposite that, on the other side of the river, is a brickworks, which is full of flak guns.
Right.
Because there's flak at Arnhem to defend the bridge, right? Of course there is, because it's the last bridge over the Rhine. So of course there's flak there. And of course, what are you going to do with these flak guns if there's parachute battalions trying to force their way along the lower road that has no cover, along the embankment that has not very much cover? And it's got some slit trenches, it's got air raid trenches dug into it, the embankment, and that sort of stuff opposite the hospital.
What's the episode with the two brothers from Devon or Cornwall?
Yes, that's on the Monday when they're trying to go up the railway line and they're both killed. Twin brothers, aren't they? And they're both killed.
That's right, yeah.
Awful business.
Yeah, from Cornwall, I think, Phil.
That's right, yeah. Horrendous. But basically, this is an unideal area to try and force the issue. And the Germans at the far end of this embankment, and it offers this great big open field of fire where you're being fired on from the other side of the river. At the other end of the embankment, the Germans have dug in again with oil cans filled with sand, and they've built proper emplacements and stuff, right? Machine guns and all this stuff up the other end. They've got ample mortars on the other side of the river that you can't do counter-mortar fire to.
Yep.
And then the other side of the hospital running along is the railway line, marshalling yards and stuff that the Germans have invested as well. And at the top of the kind of hill and the bend and the road that goes up the hill into the town is a building that's the museum, a town museum. They call it at the time, for some reason, the Monastery. If people get into their heads that it's called the Monastery. So the idea is the South Staffords will go up the road, past the hospital, up into the town, up to the Monastery and beyond. Mm-hmm. 3 Para will go along the lower road and skirt the embankment and try and push that way. And then 11 Para will come in as a reserve and sit on South Stafford's left shoulder on their left flank and, if they can, swing round over the railway line and come that way up into the town.
And so St. Elizabeth Hospital, how far are you from the bridge? A couple of miles?
About a mile and a half, if that. A mile and a quarter.
Okay, you're really close.
You're really, really close. And you're certainly close to making it. If you get past all of this bottleneck, you're within spitting distance, really, of the bridge, and certainly of influencing what's happening at the bridge. All this time, by the way, in the fighting on the Monday, Anthony Dean Drummond, who's the deputy head of signals in 1st Airborne, he goes forward and he gets tangled up in the fighting. Because in the fighting on the Monday...
Isn't Dean Drummond the one who's in Colossus?
Yeah. He's been in Italy. He's escaped from prisoner of war camps, gets caught, comes back. He's an extraordinary man.
For those who don't know, Operation Colossus is the first special air service raid on an aqueduct in Puglia in in southeast
That's right.
Italy in 1941.
Yeah. Total disaster.
Total disaster. Well, or is it?
Well, it depends on your point of view. But I mean, if you're on that operation...
If you're Dudley Clark, you're pretty happy. But if you're Tony D. Drummond, you're a bit nonplussed.
Exactly. In the fight, in a sort of spiral of fighting on the Monday, some people get past this bottleneck, but get stuck.
So it's even more Neapolitanized.
Yeah, exactly. Dean Drummond, at this point, when all this is happening, he's in a house, the other end of the embankment.
Right.
And he's in there, and the Germans enter the building. Him and his mates basically all hide. This whole thing, he's hiding in a toilet with two other blokes for this entire battle. Awful. Anyway, so these are the problems. And the Germans are nose to tail with AFVs at the other end, parked by the railway station that's at the other end of all of this. They brought people in because they know that they've got to stop more people getting to the bridge, because then the bridge is easier to deal with and so on, right? Unbeknown to everyone else, at 0330 hours, 3 Para, in the meantime, put in their own attack, which no one knows about.
Because it's all got jumbled up and no one's communicating to one another and no one knows what the hell's going on.
Exactly. There's 150 of Fitch's men left, and he sends his guys out and they're like knocking on doors, seeing who's in there. They've got fabric on their boots, and they gather the men really, really quickly and effectively, bring them together, and they go in, before dawn. And they get as far as the end of the embankment. So the sort of 400-yard stretch. They get to the kind of the end, and then they're completely overwhelmed by gunfire as it becomes light. And Fitch orders a retreat. So they're falling back as the 1 Para attack goes in.
Yep.
And there's this brilliant exchange. So Lieutenant Colonel Doby of 1 Para runs into this guy, Dorian Smith,
Well, so you do Doby and I'll do Captain Dorian Smith.
who's from 3 Para, and they know each other from North Africa and Sicily. Doby says, "Good morning."
And Captain Dorian Smith says, "Where the hell do you think you're going?"
"I'm going up here."
I wouldn't do that if I were you. It's full of mortars and machine guns and whatnot.
"How do you know?"
Because I've bloody well been there.
"Well, come and show us."
Not bloody likely.
And in this retreat, Fitch is killed. And with him is his intelligence officer, a guy called Vendor Piety.
Which is a sad moment because I'm a fan of Fitch.
Yeah, he seems like a decent fellow. With him is a white Russian exile. I can never pronounce his name. Vendor Penine or something, right? Who is killed in the same barrage of mortar fire. There's mortar in his back and in his legs and everything. And makes it back, but Fitch is killed. And
Is he killed by a mortar round? Or by a bullet or what?
he's killed by mortars.
They all are, aren't they?
Bush is the 2 I see with him, watches this mortar barrage coming in, and what it does is it gets a strip of mortar bombs lands in one line, and then it moves a couple of feet along,
Amazing.
another line, and another line, and another line, and it's creeping along the embankment towards them. And he says, we've got to get out of here, and sees Fitch killed. So basically, that is the end of 3 Para, essentially.
Wow. It's amazing, isn't it? So they've been torn to shreds.
Torn to pieces. It's transports further back, and all that, but the fighting end of the battalion is gone. 3 Para also, in its own push to the other end, kind of the same thing happens to them. There's no way through, and they're broken down into tiny parties. Companies are reduced to handfuls of men.
You're just completely canalised, aren't you? Because you've got the railway embankment, the Germans are north of that, they're firing down the streets. You can't get them, blocking the main road as the bottleneck comes up further up ahead. You've got SPs, you've got Stugs and anti-tank guns. You've got Germans up in windows with machine guns and snipers. It's what my friend Mike Simpson would call a kill zone.
It's a complete kill zone. And 3 Para are done in by this. The 2nd South Staffs go up the hill to the monastery or the museum. They take the building, but at great cost.
Yep.
Like half of companies being whittled away by this. There's fire from every angle, again, from the other side of the river and from this blocking line. Among them is Lieutenant Jack Reynolds.
Who's a tremendous character, isn't he?
Yeah. And he's the very famous photo of the bloke giving the German photographer the V sign. The German film cameraman, the 2 fingers. And
just fantastic.
He says, I don't know, maybe they thought it was like a Churchill V sign, but I was actually telling them what I thought of them, And he's very interesting because he's captured, obviously. He says the one thing, and a lot of people who taken prisoner said the one thing they hadn't psychologically prepared themselves for was being taken prisoner.
Yeah.
He says you suddenly find yourself in a situation you have to do everything you're told without fail. And he found it incredibly difficult.
It just does their head in because they're all about not doing that, aren't they?
Exactly. And he's got there's a really great audio account of him talking on the IWM site where he says he's got little good to say about Market Garden, really. He goes, because at one point, Brigadier Hicks sees him and goes, "You, Reynolds, are my eyes and ears," and sticks him on a bicycle and sends him forward. And he's like, why is he doing this? I'm a specialised mortar officer. He knows that. I'm not an intelligence guy. I should be with my platoon, right? But he can't disobey. So, he goes forward a bit, abandons the bicycle, finds his lads again. He says there's no maps. We didn't know there were 2 roads. We knew that we were told about one road, we didn't know about the other road, and the problem with the other road was the bloody Germans were at the end of it. So he tells his radio op, they're going forward to ditch his radio, it's getting him shot, it doesn't work. So he ends up calling in mortar fire by hollering the mortar adjustments, because the Germans are that close anyway.
Yeah.
Hollering the calls from the top floor of the monastery to the crew are dug into the hollow behind him. That's how they're directing their mortar fire. The Piat ammo runs out. The Piats, and with Robert Kane, who's came in his glider finally.
Second leg.
Yeah.
Yep.
Robert Kane starts to realise that the Piat will deter the German armour, but it won't necessarily destroy it, right? So what the Germans in the end decide to do is back away, stand off and shell them out. He sends some men in the buildings on the other side of the road, and he realises it's a mistake because they're now a penny packet that can be reduced by the Germans at will. Yeah. The buildings are on fire. There are wounded everywhere.
And the point about Pierce is their range isn't particularly long.
It's not particularly long.
And it's certainly not as good as that of a SP gun.
And so what you're also doing here, the problem is so how the British have fought German armour generally is the Piat is kind of the weapon of last resort. That's for when things have gone wrong. When your anti-tank screen has failed, then the infantry have to get the Piat out, basically. And it's all arse about face here, because the guns are further back. They can't bring the 6-pounders up the hill. They can't bring them into range of dealing with the AFVs. And you've got sort of anti-tank people freelancing, turning up with their 6-pounders and having a go. And there's a 17-pounder, but it's too far away to deal with what's happening around the corner at the monastery at the top of the hill. Anyway, they're forced out. The chaplain, I think, goes, you know what, we've got to sack this off, everyone out.
Yep.
And at about 11 o'clock in the morning, they retreat with 150 men left of the battalion.
From the 845.
Yeah. And obviously, of the rifle companies. So there's transport about, and there's those people, the anti-tank people.
But even so.
Yeah, because the air landing battalions have integrated anti-tank. They're not. But this is the point. They've gone 400 yards up a hill. They've held a building for a couple of hours. They've been kicked out. And McCarthy is taken prisoner. It's bad. But during this fight, as the Staffords push forward, the armoured fighting vehicle sat outside Zwarteweg 14, buggers off, and Urquhart is able to escape. He's within hundreds of yards, or within scores of yards of the men deciding what to do, the men running the battle, the colonels running the battle in the town. And he says in his memoir, if I'd only known that, I'd have gone over to them and taken charge. But I didn't know that. I didn't know they were 2 minutes away from me. So I go, and it goes back to Division to find out what's going on.
To the Hartenstein.
Back to the Hartenstein, back to Oosterbeek. Drives down the lower road in a Jeep at breakneck speed with, rounds whistling around him to decide what to do next. So he goes to Div and he sends some people out to talk to Hackett. He sends Loder Simmons, who's the CRE, out to talk to Hackett, because Hackett won't come and see him from his headquarters the other side of the railway line. Won't come and see Urquhart, right? Which is, I think, interesting.
No, I won't.
No, I'm busy. Sorry.
Busy.
And he is busy, but
you've been away. You've lost my respect.
He is really busy, but we'll get to how busy he is and exactly how that's panning out for him. And he says there are orders now from Division. 11 para, who are behind the Staffords on their left flank, are told to withdraw. Ordered to withdraw and regroup further west, further back towards this high ground, this place called Dan Brink, which is sort of pimple of land at the highest bit of Arnhem around, at the other end of this housing estate, the Lombok estate, next to the jail. They're ordered to withdraw, but Lee can't quite make out his orders on the radio when he gets them. He doesn't really know what's going on. Right? They're garbled. And the staffs are also told that they need to go and take Dan Brink. They're given this second task. And this sort of illustrates that no one really knows the state they're in after the fight at the monastery. There's only 150 of them left. So Kane assembles these guys. They reassemble. And the idea is they're going to link up with 4th Parachute Brigade, who are going to be breaking into the town any minute from north of the railway line, which, of course, we'll find out ain't going to happen. And they are completely surprised as they're forming up. They're caught in the open ground at Dan Brink by German tanks come across the railway line, first of all shelling the prison because they think the British are in the prison, and then they completely overwhelm 11 para with mortaring and armoured fighting vehicles. And, the battalion ceases to exist.
So that's another one bites the dust.
Yeah, so that's another battalion gone. And that was a fresh battalion, pretty much, in every shape and form. And it's dispersed, the men disengage. And we'll come to what happens to them in the afternoon. Meanwhile, in the woods...
It really is a meanwhile, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. We said that 0330, Fitch moves, 3 para move into the town. No one else knows what's going on. But 0330, Hackett's plan, right? 156 para, they move forward, heading for a road called the Dryansweg, which comes down into Oosterbeek.
Yes.
And meets the railway line with a bridge over the railway. There's high ground beyond that. And this whole area west of Arnhem, there are these large sort of fields, and they're lined by sort of woodland, but it's forestry woodland, managed forestry. So there's piles of logs and all this sort of stuff, which means you have dense tree lines
and then wide open spaces.
And it hasn't changed much, to be fair.
It hasn't changed much. Around Johanna-Heifer, which is a sort of stables complex north of the railway line, it has changed a bit there. But at the western end, particularly north of the Wolfhazer level crossing and all that, it's exactly the same, right? It's strikingly similar. And basically, what there is a piece of high ground called Koppel, the other side of the Giant's Way. And the idea is that 156 Battalion are going to move up, take Koppel, and they'll be able to move on to Den Brink and into the town. This is where the blocking line is.
Yeah.
So they've got to approach high ground through open country, get over this road. There's a gradient up and then get up onto the high ground. So A Company does get to Koppel, right? A Company go first, B Company go on the right to go second, C Company come through, right? A Company gets to its objective, this high ground of Koppel, but only after being completely smashed to pieces by German cannon and machine gun fire. And you've got Panzers with anti-aircraft weapons on, a cannon on them, right?
Yeah.
Who are just tooling up and down the road, shooting at the men who've got into the ditches alongside the road. And it's absolutely, officers are being killed as officers do that thing of trying to rally the men, get up and issue orders, they're killed. It's bad. Major Pott, who is John Frost's brother-in-law, and he's a sort of evangelical officer. And, I think we talked about him in a couple of episodes ago about how...
Yes, we did, yeah. Because Frost is, a good CFE man, isn't he? But he's not quite in the same league of devotedness as Pott.
Pott's the real deal. He stands up with bullets flying all around him. The descriptions are all about how, this went on for ages, but maybe it was only actually 30 seconds. But he stands up with lead everywhere and he goes, "I'm sorry that I've only led the company to death and pain. But remember, there is another commander who is the way, the truth, and the life. And I am committing you into his hands as I leave you now. Lord Jesus, watch over him, please." And as regular listener Andy H said when I told him about this, said, if your company commander starts talking like that, you're in proper trouble, right?
Big time.
But Pott rallies his guys. He says, we've got to go. We've got shit or bust. So they get to Koppel, but with 8 men left, having bayoneted charged Germans off it. They see another German attack coming. There's a bloke with binoculars. They shoot him. It's all really, really high drama. But when they get to Koppel, he's shot through the wrist and the leg. The Germans take the rest of the men away, and he's left for dead.
But he isn't dead.
He isn't dead. No, he's left for dead. And a little lady who's Batman and others sort of appear, having, given the Germans a slip.
That's right. And they put his smocks on him, don't they? To keep him warm.
Cover him in smocks and leave him be. Quite extraordinary. Now, C Company, which is Geoffrey Powell, he thinks it's like a fantasy exercise. He says this is like one of these fanciful exercises we used to do back in the day in the Indian Army, because it's an Indian Army Battalion 156.
Right.
Rebadged from 151. And in fact, it's part of Dudley Clark's deception that it keeps changing its name and number. And at one point is an airborne division for a short while, I think. He says, this is madness, that we've got comms problems. No one really knows what's going on. And anyway, airborne firepower is a joke. We don't have the artillery we need to pull this sort of stuff off. You need at least a regiment of guns. They all know this. As he approaches his first tree line, he's thinking, God, they're going to, here it comes, and then nothing happens. He says, never has an anticlimax been so welcome in my life. Right?
Yes.
And he hears A Company being shot up, but he doesn't know what's going on at all. But he says it's most unpleasant in his account. John Waddy.
Yep, who I got to know. He's a lovely chap.
Yeah, lovely chap. And who you always said that he was really good at being sort of analytical about, not just his experiences, but the whole thing. Yeah. And he said the strategic and tactical arguments about Market Garden will never, ever be settled, whether it was worth doing or not. No one will ever settle that argument. I think that's an interesting thing for a guy to say, because he says in his account, without the element of surprise, airborne forces are nothing. We're basically relying on the enemy to run away. At one point, he passes an entire dead headquarters group from one of the other companies, and he says they're all dead, and that's a bit of a
wake-up moment.
Yeah, wake-up moment. What's to come? And he gets really close to one of these tank-mounted cannons.
Yes, he is in woods. I mean, he's in woods
right.
At this point, isn't
he? Yeah. Within 20 yards of this gun, and then the sniper in the tree above him shoots him in the stomach, and this huge Rhodesian soldier grabs him and drags him away over his shoulders. They have lots of Rhodesians in 156. Takes him back to the regimental aid post, where the doctor just gives him some whiskey. And he thinks, I must have had it then if he's just giving me the booze.
Whiskey for a stomach wound.
Done for. Yeah, it's awful.
So basically, we're still in the morning here, and it's all going badly wrong.
And let's see, after the break, how it's working out for the rest of John Hackett's push into the woods. See you in a tick. Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk. So when we started this episode, we said, well, we'll get through this in 50 minutes. Be fine. And here we are.
Yeah, here we are. No way to go. But it's all exciting stuff. It's worth doing.
Exactly. So 10 Para, they're the northernmost component in 1st Airborne Division at this point. The idea is they're going to go up to the Amsterdamsweg, which is a new main road that is a motorway that's under construction, but there's a road there.
But it hasn't been finished.
Exactly. It hasn't been finished further west, but it's being upgraded basically. But it joins the Drijnsweg at a junction, and there's an inn there, a traveller's rest on this road. And 10 Para are basically sort of reconnoitering in force. The first encounter that 10 Para have with the Germans is Lieutenant Colonel Ken Smith. He's in his Jeep, drives up onto the Amsterdamweg out of the road, and is shot up as he noses out onto the road. Because there's Germans are able to just fire straight down the road and control the road cleanly. And all the battalion HQ fags go up in smoke. Yep. One man is ordered to stick his head out to have a look, and he has his head blown off. So they know there's a problem. The Germans can just fire straight down the road. There's this inn at the eastern end that the Germans are in on the corner of the Drijnsweg. One of the companies gets really, really close to that, but they're caught out by superior firepower. There's nothing they can do about it. On the opposite side of this road, further west, there's this pumping station. And there's a feeling if they can get over the road, then get round behind the pumping station, they'll be able to flank the inn. So a party's sent out to go and have a look at flanking it. And they find panzers at the pumping station, lagered up there.
Not really what you want to be finding.
No, and as they retreat, the Paras who've been sent forward, they're sort of creeping out and they bump into a German patrol. Not only is it not flankable, but the Germans know that they've tried. So then they have to get the men back across the road, because they've run a load of men across the road. They have to get back across the road. This guy, Captain Lionel Queripel.
Great name.
Absolutely cool as a cucumber. Great name. And he's got his pipe jammed between his teeth, and he's walking backwards and forwards across the road, taking care of the men on opposite sides of the roads, getting them across, picking up casualties, carrying them over his shoulder. And he's just like this absolute picture of cool, right? But in this fight, the Germans stand off. Smith says what we'll do is wait for them to get really close and then we'll attack them with Pierts. And the Germans basically don't bite. And it's really bad. They run out of mortar ammo. One mortar crew's struck by counter-battery fire. They're all killed. It's awful. So Hackett is worried about the situation. He receives a visit finally from Urquhart. Hackett having previously declined to see his boss.
Yep.
He knows he can't go over the bridge to the east over the railway line, and he can't go back up to the level crossing at Wolfhazer. It's too far. Because Hackett's headquarters is the other side of the railway line, into woods, the other side of the railway line. About halfway between these two places, between the level crossing and the bridge. So Urquhart climbs up over the railway embankment, scrambles back down, finds Hackett. Hackett says, I'm very sure to see you all right, sir, all this sort of stuff. And he says, look, what's going on? I'm worried that the division isn't acting coherently and you may need to disengage, but they don't quite get round to ordering to disengage. Hackett says, I think 156 Battalion may have shot its bolt, which is one way of putting it. It's been completely shredded. Half an hour later, Urquhart gets reports that there's Germans coming in from the northwest. There's a Dutch resistance report that says there's an armoured division coming down from the north. Yep. All sorts of panicky reports. He orders Hackett to disengage. Hackett tells his 2 battalions to disengage, to withdraw. And they've got contingency withdrawal plans, which involves, the bounds of who's going where and all this sort of stuff. But they're told, you've got to get out within the next 15 minutes. We got to go. Right? So they've got to disengage while in contact with the enemy. And also in all this, around the Johanna Heifer complex, this is a landing zone that 4 Parachute Brigade are engaging over. Landing zone for the Poles, who are due in a lift at some point that day, because no one knows, because the weather's obviously gone wrong in England. So 7 Cosby, King's Own Scottish Borders, are holding this landing zone. And at about 1500, timings differ. As 10 Para and 156 and the KOSB are beginning to withdraw, the Poles land.
It's just amazing, isn't it?
And it's the Poles' heavy kit. It's their gliders. It's their transport, right?
Yes.
Even though the parachutists are due to land on the south side of the bridge.
Right.
So there's this weird thing that, because the idea is that by this point, of course, this is, the third day of the operation, 30 Corps have arrived. So the Poles are being dropped in essentially as reinforcements because 30 Corps will have arrived. Second Army will be here. And this part of Arnhem will be safe, and you'll be able to land your gliders where you need them, in the gliding landing zones north of the river. Anyway, I think 9 or 10 of the 90 are killed. They're dispersed, they're captured, they melt away. Some of them attach themselves to the retreating 4th Brigade. Geoffrey Powell's men have a sort of weird short firefight with some Polish gunners at one point who think it's hilarious, the Poles, when they find out what's happened. But you've got this big jumble of confusion. You've got firefights, language misunderstandings. No one knows who's who in which uniform. It's really, really confused and confusing and pure chaos. But what happens is a crowd of 500 or so men start making their way back.
And they're all now all piggledy,
Jumbled.
different units.
Yeah.
Neapolitanised within their own.
Exactly. Lieutenant Peyton Reed, who's the commanding officer of the KOSB, is absolutely livid at his orders. You do not disengage when in contact with the enemy. You do not do that.
Well, except that they're being absolutely eaten alive.
Except they're being eaten alive, yeah. One of their Vickers gunners kills 50 Germans in one encounter. So he's kind of like going, look, we're doing all right, actually. We're fine. The Germans aren't that tasty. And Louis Hagen, the German Jewish glider pilot,
yes.
he overhears the Germans, because he speaks German, he overhears these Germans arguing about what to do, and they're really terrified of the powers, and they don't, so he thinks they're actually ripe for the taking. If only we'd been more coordinated. There's all these stuff swirling around. And Hagen at one point tries to talk to some British paratroopers, and they in all this confusion, they think he's a German dressed as a paratrooper, as a glider man, because he sounds German.
And is he lucky to escape with his life?
I think so, yeah. Just to throw a hand grenade away, and then they're like, all right, okay, you're all right now. Anyway, a company of the KOSB, they get confused in this collapse, and they go east and are surrounded and surrender en masse.
Oh, no.
And then Major Aeneas Perkins of 4 Squadron RE, however,
brilliant name.
What a brilliant name, has found a tunnel under the railway that you can get a jeep through.
Yes.
So it becomes clear that they can get their transport, they can get their medics out, they can get everything out under the railway bridge, rather than having to go up to the Wolfhazer level crossing. He leaves a troop each side of the tunnel to guard the tunnel, and sends his other 2 troops up to the level crossing to secure the level crossing.
It's like a culvert, isn't it? It's like a little passageway.
Round brick passageway.
Under the railway embankment.
It's absolutely amazing that it's there, and it's a sort of crumb of comfort in this collapse. Other transport, they like bouncing it over the railway lines. They found if they bounce a gun, they can bounce its wheels over the railway line. But the Germans start firing down the railway line. They're being pressed at all sides. Major Jeffrey Powell is in this crowd as they're dispersing, and he thinks, I need to be at the front so I can get my guys together from C Company, but if I run to the front, everyone will run, and then we'll have a proper panic on our hands. And the brigade major threatens, he says, I'll shoot anyone who runs. It's a very, very low moment, right? This is matched by, at 1500 hours in the south, you've got the guys withdrawing from the town. So 1, 3 para, 11 para, South Staffords remnants, right? Most of their officers have been killed or captured. They are withdrawing from the town and in a disorderly manner. And it's just not a criticism. I would be withdrawing from the town in a disorderly manner. Make no mistake.
Well, officers are dead. NCOs, most of the NCOs dead or wounded.
And they got no orders.
No cohesion.
No orders. And that's the critical bit. So they're met by Lieutenant Colonel Sheriff Thompson, who's the commander of the Light Regiment, whose guns are all dug in around the old church on the lower road by the river. And he sees these people coming back.
This is at Oosterbeek, south of
Oosterbeek, at the bottom, at the south of the village. And he sees these people coming back, dribs and drabs, sets up a roadblock. Because they're just going east, because there's no rear in an airborne division. So they're sort of going back to where they came from, kind of thing. So he goes forward, red beret, battle dress, Sten gun, and he's very, very forceful. A sergeant said, thank God we've got some orders now, so someone to tell us what to do. And interestingly, he says at that moment, he runs into Robert Kane, who's part of this group, and says, I know, Robert Kane goes on to win a VC, but at that moment, he didn't look anything like a potential Victoria Cross winner.
No. He's had it, hasn't he?
He's had it, and they've all had it. And given what's happened in the town, of course they have. And I think this is one of the things that's remarkable about the Battle of Arnhem is there's a point on the Tuesday afternoon where if the story ended here and the discretion had decided to be the better part of valour, and Urquhart had said, you know what, we're done, and had tried to negotiate a surrender, and I'm not saying it's in any of these people's nature to do that, it would be completely understandable because the situation's irretrievable.
Yeah.
So Thompson, I think, saves the division at this point, because if that lower segment, that lower road isn't held, the Germans can actually encircle.
And this used to be to where they've been around Dan Brink and the Bottleneck and all the rest of it. What, 5 miles?
No, it's sort of 2-3 miles. But he gets them to dig in further east, up near the railway line.
That's right, yes.
It's on the Wednesday that they end up having to sort of withdraw from there and come back to what becomes the classic Oosterbeek perimeter thumb line that people might be familiar with. But also, at the same time, there are men running across the lawn of the Hartenstein shouting the Germans are coming. And Urquhart himself has to go out and bring people back into the division under control with Mackenzie. And they go out and are like, again, they're being very forceful with people. And then at 1500 hours, so at the same time as all of this, the supply lift comes in with 390 short tons.
Thank God for that.
I know, 160 aircraft, 390 short tons of supplies, an absolute disaster. And I would say obviously we want you to listen to this podcast, but go on Spotify and listen to Stanley Maxted's report of this. I can see them coming in, they're flying low, and it's all boom, 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 bang, bang. Absolutely horrifying, because they're coming in at kind of 600 feet.
Yep.
You've got RASC dispatchers in the aircraft, physically chucking the stuff out the Sterlings. They've got a rail system in the Dakota to drop supplies. It's really bad. And everyone knows it's a disaster. And the reason it's a complete disaster is because the supply zone is to the east of this Dryensweg road that we were talking about a moment ago that 156 Power failed to take. The Germans hold it. The Germans hold the supply zone. In the morning, Urquhart tries to make contact with London, and all the radio nets are open. So there's a kind of mystery that the signal doesn't reach the RAF, although actually the planning might be just impossible to change at this point. The Germans hold the drop zone. Urquhart's tried to alert the RAF to this, but the message doesn't get through, whatever. You have Flight Lieutenant David Lummy Lord wins his VC, where his plane's on fire. He goes round again.
It's amazing.
And eventually crashes. One man is thrown clear, and that's, is able to say, he said, we're going back round again, chaps. All the RASC dispatchers are killed, of course. There's now a memorial at the drop zone to the RASC people and to this effort. And on one plane, on one Sterling, there's a Fleet Air Arm guy who's stowed away for the runs the previous days have been okay. And so he's like, oh, great, I'll come along. And he's lost. He's killed.
Yeah.
And First Airborne, they need these supplies if they aren't going to be relieved today. And they aren't going to be relieved today. And they don't get their hands on the supplies.
So it literally couldn't have been a bigger cock-up.
More perfect cock-up. Then in the evening, and also this is the supply lift that Red Berets pop up.
Yes.
Right? Powell finds some Red Berets. And then at the bridge...
You still got Frostmen's at the bridge, who are now very low on ammo.
Exactly, very low on ammo. They're running out of Piat ammo. The 6-pounder crews can't come out safely because of sniper fire and all this sort of thing. And you get these stories where the tanks are so close they can't lower their guns low enough to strike at the anti-tank crews who are that close to them. It's all this sort of stuff. But the Tigers appear as the light fails.
Right.
And these are much harder to deal with than the Mark IIIs that are turned up in the afternoon. That can be repulsed with Piats at close range. And the men are grateful that basically the Germans are using anti-tank rounds because they'll go through the houses rather than simply knock them down.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Isn't it?
Particularly at that range.
Yeah. I mean, it's just horrendous. The Padre's been wounded by the end of the evening. Yeah. He's in a building that collapses.
Sellers are absolutely chocker, aren't they? They're just absolutely stuffed.
Absolutely chock full of wounded, but they're not going to surrender. And there's the great story of Lance Sergeant Stan Halliwell, who's a sapper, who's taken prisoner hiding under a Panzer. His mate's killed and he's hiding under his Panzer and thinks, and you hear the crew inside, like on the radio, and he thinks, I'll give it up, right? So he's taken south of the river. He says, I'll eat some big cheese. And he's told to go north of the river on his word of honor as a soldier, and he'd be escorted north of the river to go to his commanding officer, to go to Frost, because they know it's Frost, and to offer, say that we'll offer you terms of surrender and on your word of honor to return, right? So Halliwell goes up the bridge, and he realizes when he gets coming back up the bridge from the south, he realizes there's no truce. There's no white flag truce. And he's fired at by absolutely everybody, right? And he's running. And he says the longest, worst 10 minutes of his life. He's running from building to building. He's being fired at by absolutely everybody, right? And he gets to Frost. And Frost says, well, tell me all about it. And he says, well, I've been asked to go back. And he says, well, you're going to go back? He says, obviously, we're not going to surrender. Should I go back then? So I think you not going back is answer in itself. So stay put, carry on, right? And that is the story that in A Bridge Too Far has turned into the scene where he goes, I'm afraid we haven't got the facilities to take you all prisoner. That's the incident that
right.
got mutated into that. So at the end of the day, at the end of Tuesday, the 19th of September,
Black Tuesday,
4th Parachute Brigade, the remnants of 10 and 156 battalions, 200 men each, kind of from each battalion, are dug in clear of the rest of the division in the west of Oosterbeek. 10 power towards the Wolfhazer crossroads, 156 nearer Oosterbeek, but outside the divisional area, and Hackett decides to stay put. Why?
What the heck? Why would you do that?
I don't know. I think he just thinks, and there are AFVs tooling around in the night, and I think he probably thinks, how do we stay coherent if we do that? We're better off staying put for now. But it is, it's a decision that seems quite strange. Kane and the men in the southeast are now dug in. So the people who've escaped the town are now dug into the area half a mile east of the old church.
Yep, and this is all around. This is either side of that lower road. And then on their right, they've got these fields running down to the river.
Yeah, exactly. The 1st Battalion, the Border Regiment, who are defending the western side of everything, they're the only infantry battalion that's intact anymore, that's still operating. They haven't got their commanding officer, but they're still in order. The company's functioning. The Germans start to probe, and they've shortened their lines. And as the Germans attack at about 7 o'clock that evening, there's one of these encounters where they're shouting, "Come out and fight, you German bastards." And there's a great big firefight, and loads of Germans are killed because they're all really inexperienced people who are being fed into it. But by the evening, there are German tanks coming down the Utrechtsweg to Easterbeek itself,
yes,
to the crossroads near the Hartenstein, where the main dressing station, the Schurnod, is. And the battle in the town is over. It's come to the village. The battle in the woods is over. That will be coming to the village soon. And the battle of the people at the bridge are hanging on by the skin of their teeth. And that is that. And if you want to know more, buy my book.
Well, yes, I should just say, for anyone who hasn't read your book, which will be nearly everyone at the time first listening to it, because it doesn't come out until the 12th of September, please do. And you have gone into this in, obviously, far greater detail than we've been able to do in this podcast, and it's absolutely fantastic. And there's also all the other stuff that you haven't been able to mention, like the Remy and all the different component parts of 1st Airborne. And there's more kind of individual stories, and also the book is a thing of beauty because it's got all these fabulous maps.
Phil Lord's amazing work.
It's very, very difficult. We've done our very best to try and describe to you the landscape, the nature of the railway line, the bottleneck, Dan Brink, the bridge, and all this kind of stuff. But it's much easier to see pictures of it, look at aerial photographs and diagrams and maps and all that.
Yeah.
All of which are included in Black Tuesday. So everyone rush out and get it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. That's
right. Yeah, I loved it, as you know.
That's a hot plug. And, once you've read that, get Casino 44, of course.
Well, yeah, if you buy it on the 12th, should be done by 26th of September, just in time to start the next book.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you want to listen to these on What Big Fat Lump, then you can do that with Officer Class on our Apple podcast channel, or become a Patreon, where the whole of We Have Ways Fest from July is now up to be listened to, or everything that was recorded. And in fact, I think the Arnhem chat I did with Tony, we missed the first 10 minutes. So you might hear some different stuff there.
And of course, if you want to see us on location, out and about, walking the ground, then go to our new YouTube channel, which is WW2 Walking the Ground. There's lots of little films there that you can watch over your cornflakes or whatever.
Fantastic. Thanks for listening. In our next episode, we will return to events south of a river as we look at what's happening with 30 Corps, the US 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne.
Yes, what is happening? Oh, just so much drama.
Yes, exactly. What the Germans are trying to do to stop all of this. Yeah.
And the crossing of the Waal. Can you believe it?
See you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.
Arnhem, Black Tuesday. 24 hours in the Battle of Arnhem. From me, Al Murray. Now, if you're familiar with me and We Have Ways of Making You Talk, you know I do everything I can to crowbar the Battle of Arnhem into every conversation. Well, here it is, the full crowbar. Arnhem, Black Tuesday, out now in hardback, ebook and audio.